Well, for more analysis on this, we can bring in Brody, who's a war crimes prosecutor and the author of To Catch a Dictator. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
You're welcome.
I wanted to start, we've been hearing that there's very little that Ulaanbaatar can be done if Ulaanbaatar doesn't comply with this arrest warrant. Can you explain the legal reasons for this?
Sure. I mean, Mongolia is a state party to the International Criminal Court. That means that it has an obligation to cooperate with the court. Let's remember that the court does not have a police force. It relies on state cooperation in order to enforce its warrants. And of course, if in 22 years, the International Criminal Court has actually never, the prosecutors have never convicted any state official anywhere in the world, it's in large part because they're not able to capture them. But Mongolia has that obligation. And really, by going to Mongolia and not being arrested, of course, Putin is thumbing his nose at the ICC. He's thumbing his nose at Ukraine. He's thumbing his nose at his many victims, especially the tens of thousands of deported Ukrainian children for which he has been indicted by the ICC. But I think he's also forcing Mongolia to be complicit in his impunity.
You said that he's thumbing his nose at the court. Do you believe that it undermines how the ICC is viewed internationally by other countries as well?
You know, I don't. Well, first, I mean, Mongolia is a country I actually know well. Many years ago, I was invited to consult as it drafted its democratic constitution following the Soviet era. It's a democratic country. It's one of the very few countries in Asia that has ratified the ICC founding treaty. There's a Mongolian judge who was elected just last year to the ICC bench. Interestingly, just a few months ago, when the court was under attack for its actions in Israel and Gaza, Mongolia joined a statement by 94 ICC members declaring unwavering support for the ICC and calling on all members to ensure full cooperation with the court, the same cooperation that Mongolia is not providing right now. So it's obviously very disappointing to see Mongolia violate its obligations, undermine the ICC, undermine the rule of law, and hand this victory to an accused war criminal. But as your setup said, you only have to look at the map to understand Mongolia's predicament. It's squeezed between Russia and China. It's got a 3,500-kilometer border with Russia. It depends on Russia for virtually all of its energy imports, and as you said, it's had some brutal winters recently. But you know, South Africa. It's interesting because I mean, in theory, Putin cannot visit countries that have ratified the ICC. There are 124 countries. Last year, Putin was supposed to visit South Africa, a country basically allied with Russia. South Africa, for a heads of state a heads of state summit, South Africa made it clear to Putin that he should not come. A high court in South Africa reminded the government that if Putin came, it would be obliged to arrest him. Of course, South Africa has much greater leeway here. So to be honest, I think that Putin is doing this purposely. He looks at the map, he looks at the weakest ICC country, and he says, I'm going to thumb my nose, I'm going to go there. Mongolia is not going to dare arrest me. And I have to believe that Mongolia is not happy with this situation.
Right. Well, does this mean the ICC is toothless then when it comes to prosecuting state officials of things like war crimes? As you mentioned, obviously this isn't the first time that this has happened. One example that comes to mind is in 2015 when then Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir was in South Africa, but not handed over. What do you make of this?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, to date, no state has ever transferred an official from another state to the ICC. So no state has ever done what we would hope and what Mongolia should be doing today. And as I said earlier, in 22 years, there's never been a single final conviction for serious crimes at the ICC against any state official at any level, anywhere in the world, largely because the ICC is unable to get its hands on Bashir of Sudan, on Vladimir Putin. And this is certainly a weakness. I mean, the ICC depends on state cooperation. And if that state cooperation is not there, then the ICC's purpose, and let's remember that purpose, the ICC is there to prosecute the worst crimes in the world: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes. I mean, Vladimir Putin is indicted for the transfer of children from Ukraine, but he presumably will be indicted in the future, and human rights groups have abundantly documented many other war crimes: the bombing of civilian infrastructure, torture, prisoners, mistreatment of prisoners. This is why the ICC exists. And if states do not comply with their obligations, then it certainly undermines international. And I think that's exactly what Putin is trying to do here. He did not dare go to South Africa. He would not dare go to Japan or Korea, I believe. Well, they would not invite him. Poor Mongolia, I think he felt he could get away with it, and he obviously is getting away with it, and it's a tragedy.
Right. So what could we expect the future implications to be for other international figures who are also the subject of ICC arrest warrants? Perhaps we're jumping a bit too far into the future, but we know that warrants are sought for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant from Israel. If these are issued, what could we expect from that?
Well, again, I think this would implicate all the countries that have ratified the ICC treaty. I assume that if let's say Netanyahu is there's a warrant for his arrest, I don't think he would go to a Western country. I don't think Western countries would allow him in. I don't think that countries that respect the rule of law but also have the political weight to resist that. I think what Vladimir Putin is doing is he's testing that resistance. He's looking for the weak spots. You talked about Omar al-Bashir of Sudan. He tested the weak spots. I do think that it undermines the principle, but I do believe that if there are warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, that it will circumscribe their world. It will make it impossible for them to visit rights-respecting countries that are willing to uphold their obligations. Again, the ICC doesn't have a police force. It relies on the cooperation of states. And what we're seeing today is a dent in that cooperation. We're seeing an undermining of that rule of law. And hopefully it will not be repeated in other situations.
All right, Reid, Brody, we're going to have to leave it there. You're a war crimes prosecutor and an author. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
You're quite welcome.